Well, there are a minimum of 4 passes that most people do on their manuscripts. Very, very few people write such a clean draft that their first draft goes straight to the editor as is, or to publication. In fact, no book ever goes to publication on the first draft. So you're going to go through some of these stages, even if you write an exceptionally clean draft. So, for example, I tend to plan very much in upfront. My novels are very very carefully plotted out in the beginning, so that by the time I've got to the end, it's not a terribly messy draft. And because I'm quite good at grammar, spelling, and picking all that up, I tend to have probably a good enough manuscript that by the time I reach the end of the first draft, I could send it to my editor. But even I would never do that. I would still go through at least 1 or 2 of these passes before sending it off to my editor, who is still then going to do further passes. So what are they? The first one is structural or developmental edits, which are often known as macro edits. So these are the big picture edits. Then you've got copy or line edits, the micro edits. And I'll go into each of these in a bit more detail shortly. Then I recommend that the people do a read through all in one sitting, and I'll discuss why that's important. And finally, a fine tuning and a proofread. Now, I would actually do all of those stages even before sending to my editor. And I, as I say, consider myself almost like a first draft finished manuscript type person. But even so, I have all these stages built in. Right, so what do these stages encompass? Right, your first pass, the structural edits. These are where you look at things like plot, character arcs, pacing. So the big picture items. You're going to ask yourself questions like, is the story fresh or is it cliched? If it's cliched, how can you break the cliches? How can you add freshness into it? How can you make it more unique and more you? Are there clear and consistent character turning points? So this would be tied into your character arc. Can you see how this character is changing? Can you see the decisions that they're facing? Is it clear that this character is changing not just once that they do a pivot halfway through the novel and now they're a different person? Are there clear and consistent turning points throughout that show the character growth? Does the conflict escalate? Often I see beginner writers who send me their first manuscripts to edit, or when I'm coaching. In fact, when I'm coaching, I tend to push my coaching clients to start small and build. So we would already build it in as you're writing, as I'm coaching alongside the writing of the first draft, I would make sure that the conflict escalates. However, I often get sent manuscripts by beginner writers, and the conflict stays level all the way throughout because it almost feels episodic. Like this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens. And instead of building and escalating the conflict, it just sort of flatlines. And it makes for just a little bit of a boring read for the reader. Readers are built in, they're wired to expect the conflict to escalate. So this is the point at which you need to look at that rough first draft and decide, is it escalating enough, or do I need to boost it? Do I need to up the stakes? Check for plot holes. Very crucial. Things that you might not have seen, especially if you took, say, 4 to 6 months to write the manuscript. You may not have remembered that 3 months ago you wrote a scene that opened up a plot line, and you never did close it by the end when you wrote the final scenes. So check for the plot holes in this draft. Were there things that you opened up but never saw to completion? And finally, do the scenes flow? This is where you're looking, as I said, at a macro level. So you're looking at the big picture. Are there unnecessary scenes? Are there scenes that just seem to lag or to drag? Again, this is where you're looking at the pacing. Do the scenes make logical sense going one to the other, or are you going to move one scene in front of another, or perhaps shift them around? Also, on the structural edits, you're going to ask yourself questions like, does every scene contain a goal and an obstacle? So now you've gone from the big picture view, the plot holes, the overall pacing. You're going to take it down to a slightly narrower look, looking at each scene on its own, or each chapter on its own. Does the character have a goal, and is there some sort of obstacle to prevent them from achieving that goal in this particular scene? Are the conflicts and motivations clear to the reader? Can the reader see why your characters are doing the things that they're doing? Are they understanding the character progression? do the characters behave consistently? Now, this is tied into the previous line because obviously you don't want to have a character who is, for example, afraid of the dark, who then willingly walks into dark places. For example, if you were writing a horror, if you have made your one character very afraid of the dark, we're going to think, the reader's going to think, oh my goodness, how stupid is that character if they keep putting themselves into danger and going out exploring in the dark, in the dark forest at night. We're going to know, that something is going to, bad is going to happen to them, which we're going to know anyway because of the genre that you're writing. But at the same time, we want the characters to behave consistently. If they are inconsistent, you need to motivate that. What is at stake that they would be willing to go against or to indulge in their biggest fear? Sorry, I've got a bit of a thunderstorm developing in the background, so I hope that the thunder is not coming through too much on the microphone. The next thing you need to look out for when you're creating, when you're looking at your characters, is be on the lookout for stereotypes. Your character who wandered into the forest in the dark of night, are they a bit of a cardboard cutout? Are they the stereotypical blonde bimbo cheerleader type who, is too dumb to realize that she's walking into a trap? If you have written a stereotype, how can you break that stereotype? How can you give that character more depth and make them more realistic? And then look for logical inconsistencies. Now, these are the kind of things that a coach or an editor would also look out for. Sometimes you don't see the logical inconsistencies, but this I find often when I'm reading my clients, especially coaching clients, where I'm reading very much their first draft. I will often be the one pointing out inconsistencies. Oh, but in the previous scene, you said that they were going to go to Xanadu, and now in this scene, they're going to Greece. Why has that changed? It might just be that the writer forgot. Okay, that was a bit of an obvious one, but sometimes you write a certain thing in which then doesn't match to the next scene. A fresh pair of eyes can definitely pull that up, but ideally before you send your work to an editor, especially if you're putting your work out on submission to a publishing house or an agent, you want to check for all those logical inconsistencies yourself, which basically means you need to interrogate everything you've written. And then I said previously, you're going to look at how the scenes flow one to the other. Now coming down to a scene level, so that was sort of big picture looking. Does the one scene fit with the scene that follows after it, fit logically with the scene that follows after it? Now you're looking within the scenes at the opening and closing of each scene. Do you come in too late, too early, and you've got a lot of rambling and maybe unnecessary boring stuff at the beginning of the scene? Do you leave the scene too late? Again, try and tighten up those endings. Start at the point of action, close at a point of crisis or at a bit of a cliffhanger to keep the reader on the edge of their seat. So this is where you're going to look at the opening and closing of each scene and tighten them up and make sure that you start and end each scene with as much drama and as much interest for the reader as possible to keep them hooked.